Weeks ago, I lost my father after a long battle with his health. My name is Kelly, and I often find myself wishing I had introduced him to his grandchildren. This thought always brings a heavy sigh. 5 years ago, when I was 37, I got married. On that happy day, my father and I made a special promise. I would be the first to tell him if I was pregnant. Sadly, that's a promise I can never fulfill, and it's what I regret most. My father's illness was diagnosed a year ago, and since then, I did everything possible to be by his side. I visited the house where we grew up more frequently, spent countless hours in the hospital with my mother, and whispered my worries aloud. My mother, always attentive and understanding, consoled me, saying, "Kelly, you did everything you could. Your father knew it, and he was proud of you." Just then, my sister, Julia, entered, accompanied by a man who appeared to be around 45, probably a lawyer. "This is Scott, the lawyer," Julia introduced him, while my mother quickly offered him a seat. We settled down, and it was then that Julia, unable to contain herself, mentioned that the lawyer had said Dad left us a significant inheritance. Tension filled the room. I responded without thinking, "Julia, you know it's not all yours." That comment instantly changed the atmosphere. Julia and I have always had a complicated relationship, aggravated by our father's illness. Her refusal to visit him, despite my attempts to bring them closer, only worsened things. Her always difficult attitude became even more evident in these moments of crisis. Reflecting back, I know my words towards her were often harsh, driven by my worry for our father. But her response didn't help either. "I'm an adult. I don't have to be so stubborn," I told her. She retorted, "I'm not being stubborn. Living in the city and traveling to the countryside isn't as simple as you think. It's only a 5-hour drive." I replied, to which she responded with a sour tone that those 5 hours weren't just time, but money, and that was important to her. She added that she was busy and asked me to stop bothering her. That's how our conversation ended. I always thought she could make an effort to visit us occasionally, and that belief was one of the main reasons our relationship began to crumble. But in the end, she never visited our father, and the distance between us only grew. The tension in the room reached its peak until the lawyer intervened, suggesting we all take a moment to calm down. Trying to smooth things over, I apologized, saying I was sorry. This seemed to improve the atmosphere slightly. The lawyer resumed, "As I mentioned over the phone, I'm here regarding your father's will." My mother, with an expression of confusion, quietly asked, "When was this arranged?" Scott replied, "A few weeks before your father passed away. He contacted me." My mother, still incredulous, questioned, "He asked you to come to the hospital?" The lawyer nodded and explained, "Yes, I drafted the will there. His primary care physician was also present. He arranged for the doctor to notify me when his father passed. So I contacted you now." He took out a white envelope and placed it in front of us. Seeing my father's handwriting on the envelope, I whispered, "That's definitely Dad's handwriting." Julia, visibly impatient, interrupted, "Get on with it. What does it say?" "You know I'm busy." The lawyer, with a slight professional smile, opened the envelope. Inside was a single document listing the assets of the inheritance, the family home, some nearby land, accumulated savings, and a shed. The mention of the shed was new to me, but I didn't give it much importance at the time. However, my sister Julia, visibly frustrated, turned to the lawyer with a direct question. "Wait, and the farm?" The lawyer seemed surprised by the question. "The farm?" he repeated, searching for any mention in the documents. "Yes, the farm," I clarified, trying to explain. Dad had started working on it as a hobby after partially retiring. He had run a successful business in a nearby city, but when he turned 55, he decided to slow down, close the company, and dedicate himself to his hobbies, like farming. I recalled that during my adolescence, when I shared my desire to take life more calmly, my father supported me. Julia, however, never agreed with that idea. My mother and I had been worried about my father's health, so we didn't hesitate to support his decision to leave behind the business stress. "Don't worry about the money, Julia. We have enough savings," my father had reassured her at the time. Although initially hesitant, Julia eventually accepted it. After that conversation, my father closed his business and dedicated himself to the farm near our home. "Working with the land has something gratifying," he used to say with a radiant smile. His happiness in those days confirmed that we had made the right decision. Although Julia seemed less convinced, she had moved away from the family home after graduating, building her career near her university, and eventually marrying a CEO of a tech company. Meanwhile, my father continued his dedication to farming until his health began to deteriorate. The mention of the farm brought back memories and emotions, but Julia insisted it should be included in the inheritance. The lawyer, trying to clarify the matter, reviewed the documents. The farm was actually leased land. He explained, "We mistakenly assumed it was owned by your father." Julia seemed disappointed by this revelation, but I felt relieved, knowing it would simplify things. The conversation soon focused on the distribution of the inheritance. "The house and surrounding land will go to the wife," said the lawyer, referring to my mother. Julia smiled, clearly more interested in what remained to be distributed. "The rest, including the savings and the shed, will be divided between the two sisters," added the lawyer. "The savings," Julia said quickly, interrupting. "That means cash, right? I'll take that." The lawyer confirmed that the savings amounted to $300, a sum not subject to inheritance tax. Julia, feeling victorious, declared, "I want the $300 in cash." That didn't seem fair to me, and I decided to intervene. "Wait, I don't agree. Why should you get all the money?" "Because I'm the older sister," she retorted, as if that were enough to justify it. "Fine, you can have the shed," she added dismissively, then looking at the lawyer, asked, "And how much is that worth?" The lawyer explained that the shed included a small plot of land, about 90 square feet. "Whoever inherits it will own the structure, the land, and everything inside," he said, showing some photos of the place. The shed looked quite dilapidated on the outside, and inside there were only gardening tools, hoses, shears, shovels, nothing that seemed valuable from an economic point of view. Julia looked at the images with disdain. "I don't want this," she declared flatly. "It's full of old, worthless things." "Fine," I responded, a little calmer. "Then you keep the money. I don't want anything to do with that old shed." Julia immediately accepted, clearly happy to keep the savings. For me, the shed and its tools, although they didn't seem to mean much, held sentimental value that she couldn't understand. The protest escaped me before I could contain it. "Wait, this seems unfair," I said, feeling trapped as my sister rushed to keep the cash, the most valuable part of the inheritance, leaving me with the shed she considered useless. Her insistence and my mother's lack of opposition made me feel abandoned, especially when my mother commented, "As long as Julia doesn't complain afterwards, I don't see any problem with this agreement." Julia, with her usual assurance, responded dismissively, "Complain? Why would I complain?" She quickly signed a document agreeing not to question the distribution of the inheritance and did so with a confident smile. I was left with the shed, a decision that left me frustrated and disappointed. When I tried to talk to my mother later, seeking some support, I was met with excuses. "Why didn't you support me?" I asked, feeling betrayed. "I did support you," she insisted. "My involvement ensured you kept the shed. But for me, that wasn't enough." "The shed isn't enough," I replied. She tried to give it some tangible value. "Perhaps you'll find something unexpectedly wonderful if you give it a chance." Although I still felt disappointed, her words sparked a glimmer of hope in me. Maybe the shed held some special memory of my father, something I hadn't yet discovered. I asked the lawyer for the key and headed towards the shed, which was next to a field about 15 minutes from our house. The road was quiet, almost solitary, and the atmosphere, although serene, seemed charged with melancholy. The field was empty, a place that used to be full of life during the years my father worked it. Now it seemed a reflection of his absence. Upon opening the shed, I encountered a thick layer of dust and a heavy air that spoke of the time that had passed since its last use. "Wow, it's very dusty," I murmured. I examined the tools, shovels, hose, shears, though they didn't seem to have economic value. I wondered if perhaps one of them held special meaning for my father. As I explored, I noticed something strange. The size of the shed didn't match. From the outside, it seemed bigger than from the inside. Was it a simple error of perception? Or was there something more? I went outside to investigate, walking around the structure. Then I saw it, a second door hidden among a group of dense trees. I was speechless. From inside the shed, there was no indication of this door. My curiosity soared. What did this mean? Had my father created a secret space? The possibility that this was another of his characteristic touches thrilled me. He had always liked to surprise us, especially on my birthdays, with unique and meaningful details. I returned to the inside of the shed, determined to find the key to this mysterious back door. After a careful search, I discovered 4 keys cleverly hidden in the handle of a shovel. My heart pounded as I took one of the keys and headed back to the secret door. With a clear and satisfying click, the door opened. Inside, in the small hidden space, sat a large safe, alone and imposing. I gasped at the sight of it. "It's from Dad's company," I murmured. On its surface, I felt a mix of excitement and nostalgia. It seemed there were still parts of his life that I didn't know. Secrets that now belonged to me to unravel. This discovery not only spoke of his character but also of his love for the unexpected. As if he had planned this personal treasure hunt as a last gift for me. The safe was unmistakable, a relic from my father's office. So familiar from my childhood. Seeing it there, in the middle of the small hidden space of the shed, filled me with deep nostalgia. It was more than an object, it was a tangible link with my father. As if he had deliberately left this trail for me to find. As I observed it, a part of me knew this was only the beginning of the surprises he had planned for us. With trembling hands, I tried the 3rd key. The safe's door opened with a creak that resonated in the small space. What I saw inside left me completely astonished, a collection of finely organized watches. Each with its own story, each a piece of my father's passion. Some watches bore small engravings that probably contained clues about important moments in his life. This find transformed what seemed like an unequal inheritance into a legacy rich in meaning and value. I decided to secure the safe immediately. With my husband's help, we moved it to my parents' house to study it more calmly. Reflecting on the discovery, I realized its value wasn't just sentimental. These watches could have a significant financial impact. Thinking about the tax implications, I contacted the family lawyer, who recommended I seek advice from a public accountant to handle any possible tax obligations. Over the next year, while the watches were being appraised and the tax details were being managed, something unexpected happened. My sister appeared at my house. Her visit was a surprise, considering our tense relationship since the inheritance distribution. Julia, although claiming to be passing through, seemed restless. Her behavior suggested there was something more behind her arrival. After serving her coffee, her restlessness transformed into direct questions. "Have you won the lottery or something?" she asked abruptly. I was disconcerted by her question. I had no idea what she was referring to. So I asked her to explain. Her tone shifted to irritation. "Are you making fun of me?" Her reaction seemed disproportionate, but then she mentioned a conversation she'd had with our aunt. Apparently, our aunt had received a $10 gift card from me as a token of gratitude for having visited our father during his illness. Julia interpreted this as evidence that I had found a fortune. "You've struck it rich, haven't you? Admit it," she insisted, seeking answers with growing impatience. I sighed and calmly explained the origin of the money. I told her about the shed she had dismissed without interest and the surprising discovery of the safe inside. As I described the collection of watches, I noticed how her expression changed from disbelief to a mixture of astonishment and frustration. "All this was in that old shed?" she asked, as if she still couldn't accept the situation. I explained that, like her, I had initially underestimated the shed. But now, with the collection of watches valued at $500,000, I understood that our father had left a much more significant legacy than it seemed. I also mentioned the tax concerns this had generated, especially after my mother advised me to handle everything with transparency. Following this advice, we ensured legal compliance with the help of the public accountant. We confirmed that the valuation amounted to $500. The lawyer explained that this sum, due to its value, was subject to inheritance tax. Although the process was complicated, I committed to handling everything responsibly, as I knew my father would have expected. While Julia listened, her face showed a mixture of regret and ambition. However, I understood that this discovery wasn't just financial. It was a testament to our father's love, his ability to surprise us even after his departure, and the profound meaning of the seemingly ordinary objects he left behind. Although our relationship remained tense, this legacy reminded me how important it was to appreciate what we had and find meaning in what might at first seem insignificant. The advice to keep only the watches that held sentimental value for me and to sell the rest was not only sensible but also necessary. Keeping my father's pocket watch was an easy decision. It didn't have high economic value, but it was full of memories. It was the one he always carried, the one he used to teach the passage of time and tell stories of his youth. However, selling the others allowed us to settle several outstanding matters, such as paying the inheritance tax and thanking the relatives who helped us during my father's illness. It was this gesture of gratitude that initially sparked my sister Julia's curiosity. when I showed her the pocket watch and tried to explain its emotional importance. Her reaction was as I expected, distant. Julia seemed more interested in the watches I had sold and the safe that contained them. I told her about the safe that was still at our mother's house and how it was once an essential tool for our father's business. She seemed to reflect on what I told her, and although she didn't express anything openly, she left me uneasy when she left. I thought everything was over, but her behavior kept haunting my mind. That same night, my suspicions began to be confirmed. I received an anguished call from my mother, asking me to come to her house immediately. My husband and I rushed to arrive only to find an alarming scene. Red lights from patrol cars illuminated the darkness, and several police cars surrounded the house. Overwhelmed, I pushed my way through the small crowd gathered to find my mother, who, clearly disturbed, began to explain what had happened. She was getting ready for bed when she heard strange noises coming from inside the house. At first, she thought she was imagining things, but she soon realized that someone was frantically rummaging through the rooms. Alone and terrified, she made the decision to escape through a window and seek help. From the outside, she noticed the glow of a flashlight moving through the house, which confirmed her worst fears. An intruder had entered. My mother ran to a neighbor's house, who, upon observing the suspicious activity, called the police. However, what no one knew at that moment was that the thief was none other than my sister, Julia. In her desperation to access the safe, she had broken into the house without thinking about the consequences. Her presence, combined with the suspicious behavior, had frightened both my mother and the neighbor, who acted logically given the circumstances. When the police arrived, the situation took an even more surreal turn. Julia, surprised in the middle of her search, tried to flee, but in her haste, she tripped over the safe, which overturned and fell on her. The impact left her trapped underneath. Complaining of sharp pain in her leg, she was rushed to the hospital to treat the injury, leaving everyone astonished by the recklessness of her actions. After the chaos, my mother and I found ourselves apologizing to the officers for the misunderstanding. The scene was difficult to process. Our own family had caused an episode that, if not so serious, would have been comical. Julia, in her quest to obtain more, ended up exposing not only her intentions but also the consequences of her excessive ambition. That night marked a turning point. While Julia faced the consequences of her actions, both legal and personal, my mother and I reflected on the challenges and tensions that my father's inheritance had brought to our family. What should have been a legacy of love and remembrance had become a catalyst for conflict, but also an opportunity to learn about priorities, values, and what truly matters at the end of the day. I felt I should inform Julia's husband about what happened, thinking that as her partner, he had a right to know what had occurred. However, what he revealed to me left me stunned. Julia had been hiding a large amount of accumulated debt due to her excessive spending on luxury items. Their last argument had ended with her angry and determined to borrow money from our mother to get out of trouble. What we didn't know was that she had already spent all her share of the inheritance trying to pay off these debts unsuccessfully. Julia's husband, visibly frustrated and at his limit, confessed that he had been dealing with her poor financial management for years. Now, after this last incident and her breaking into the family home, he had decided to take a definitive step. He wanted a divorce. This news was a blow to both Julia and the family and clearly explained her desperate actions that night. At the hospital, the tension reached a critical point when her husband confronted her directly about her financial problems and mentioned his intention to divorce. What began as a private conversation quickly turned into a dramatic confrontation. Julia, angry and in a mixture of denial and desperation, insisted, "I'm not getting a divorce." However, the seriousness of the situation became clear when he presented the divorce papers in person. Something she couldn't ignore. With her injured leg and trapped in a hospital bed, Julia finally gave in. She signed the divorce papers with a mix of resignation and sadness. While she browsed a magazine looking for part-time jobs, it was a bleak but revealing moment that offered at least a small hope that she would begin to take responsibility for her decisions and start building a new life from scratch. For me, the recent events were a catalyst for making an important decision. After much reflection, I decided to return to my childhood home. I wanted to be closer to my mother after all the chaos. But there was also a happier reason behind this choice. I was pregnant. After years of trying and lamenting not being able to keep my promise to my father, I was finally expecting a child. My husband and I discussed at length what would be best for our family. And returning home seemed the right decision. Having my mother's support as we prepared for this new chapter of our lives was something I valued immensely. Not being able to share this news with my father was consoled by the idea that wherever he was, he would be happy for us. As I entered this new stage of my life, excitement and hope filled my heart. The arrival of a child was a reminder that even amidst difficulties and family tensions, there is always room for new beginnings. And so, as we returned to the family home, I felt peaceful, knowing that this was a step towards a future filled with love, unity, and the opportunity to create happy memories for the next generation.